So last week, we talked about applications from the book of Revelation. So tonight kind of fits into our discussion of application as well, but it'll be a different topic. Most of the world has failed to realize some of the things we've talked about in this class, mainly our 4 keys that we focused on week 1 and we've periodically reviewed and repeated throughout the whole quarter. What are our 4 keys? Background, audience, style, and time frame. Those are very important. Through our whole study, they've been important. Tonight, they will be very important. Because many people fail to pay attention to these things and keep these things in mind, it's led to a lot of false doctrine and false teachings from the book of Revelation, which is what we're discussing tonight. There are numerous false doctrines in the world that are taught from this book, various denominations and religious groups. So many people use this book in so many different ways, it would be impossible for us to cover all of them. We're gonna look primarily at 2 different doctrines, mainly for time reasons, but also because these 2 are probably 2 of the most prominent, 2 of the ones that you're going to hear most talking to people out in the world. The ones we're going to talk about tonight, Jehovah's Witness and premillennialism. Those are the 2 we're going to look at. Really going to split our class in half to look at each one of those. We're going to talk about what these things teach, where they come from, or where they're brought from in our Bibles. And then ultimately we're going to talk about how to approach these things and breaking them down and how to determine these things from truth. I gave you some disclaimers last week, and I'll give you another one this week. Should be obvious. I'm not teaching these things as truth, okay? Don't take any of my statements out of context. I may say a chapter in Revelation teaches X, Y, Z. If I'm in the context of a false doctrine, please understand I'm not teaching false doctrine, okay? Let's all keep that in mind as we talk about these things. My goal in sharing these things with you is to make sure you've heard these things. They're important. If we're talking about the book of Revelation and we're trying to understand it and trying to be able to share it with other people, we're going to have conversations with other people who will believe very different things than us. And so I hope that tonight you'll be able to learn from this discussion so that when you have those conversations with other people who might believe these things or others, you'll better know how to approach those conversations. You'll find yourself more prepared. If you're not prepared for these things, I'd rather you find yourself caught off guard in here rather than out in the world talking to people. So if you've got questions or if there's things that I skip over that you want to bring out in these doctrines, let me know. This is a good place for us to talk about those things. I'm going to share the basics of these doctrines with you. We're going to look at the foundational teachings of them. So obviously there's a lot of details encompassed in these things we're going to skip over for time reasons. But also we're going to really focus on the aspects that come from Revelation, because that's obviously the topic of our discussion. I'm going to present the doctrines to you, and then we're going to look at how to really break them down and discuss them in correct context. So we're going to start off this evening talking about Jehovah's Witness. We've mentioned the Jehovah's Witness a couple times throughout the quarter, through a few of the different studies. The Jehovah's Witness teach a lot of different things from the Bible as well as things from the book of Revelation. Their teachings are heavily found in the book of Revelation. If you ask someone who was a Jehovah's Witness what the book of Revelation was about, here's what they would tell you. The Greek name of the Bible book of Revelation, Apocalypse, means uncovering or disclosure. This name indicates the meaning of Revelation. It uncovers matters that had been hidden, and discloses events that would happen long after it was written. Many of its prophecies are yet to be fulfilled. I got this quote directly from the Jehovah's Witness website, jw.org. If you'd like, write that website down. You can go learn a lot more about the Jehovah's Witness. But I just say that because I really am trying tonight to present this in a way that's true to what they believe and what they teach. I don't want to misconstrue it in any way. So this is a quote directly from the Jehovah's Witness. I think it's clear that there are a few things wrong with what they have to say about the book of Revelation. We're going to get into more detail about that in a couple minutes. Also, to help people understand the book of Revelation, Jehovah's Witnesses have their own keys to Revelation. The same way we had keys to help us understand it, they have keys that they present on their website as well. I want to share a couple of them with you now. I'm not going to share all of them with you. They have a lot. Their key number 2 states that Revelation uses many signs or symbols that are not to be understood literally. I point this out not because I think it's wrong, but because I think it's interesting in light of some of the things that they'll teach later in the book. And we'll get to that. Their key number 5. To understand the book of Revelation, we need the same things that help us to understand the rest of the Bible, including wisdom from God and assistance from those who already understand it. Again, I don't entirely disagree with that. We do need to understand the rest of the Bible to be able to approach Revelation and to be able to fit it within the context of the rest of the Bible. And the last one I'll share with you is their key number 4. The visions of this book apply to the Lord's Day, which began when God's kingdom was set up in 1914, and Jesus began ruling as king. Therefore, we can expect the main fulfillment of Revelation to be in our time. Year 2018 is what they're talking about. This one I would have more to disagree on than the other two. Again, we're going to break down some of these things as we move forward, but just to continue the idea of what they're teaching, what's one thing that sticks out to you in that key? A pretty big one. 1914, yeah. The start of God's kingdom in 1914. That's very important in the teachings of the Jehovah's Witness, that the church, that God started the kingdom of God in the year 1914. It didn't start when Jesus was here 2,000 years ago. It started about 100 years ago. They teach that when Jesus came to earth 2,000 years ago, he came to prophesy about this coming of the church and these things that would happen in the future. He did not come to start the kingdom himself or to have the kingdom start at that time. It was to start later. And at that time, nobody knew when, but the book of Revelation sheds some light on when this kingdom was to come, which is how we'll end on 1914. And I'm going to break down their calculation for you so you kind of know where this is coming from. So one of the things that God's people were to understand from very early on was that God's people would have to suffer a period of 7 times. This is prophesied about in Ezekiel chapter 17 and 31. It talks about how God's people would go into suffering, would go into captivity. They would suffer at the hands of evil for a period of 7 times before God would come and bring about a resolution, or a way for that to be resolved. They were looking forward to, at the end of this 7 times period, for a worthy ruler to come. Now, they teach that Jesus is this ruler. They teach that Jesus is the ruler of God's heavenly kingdom. But again, he came to earth to prophesy about it, not to bring it to bring it about. So the question would be how we know when this kingdom is coming. Like we said, the period of suffering would be 7 times before the church would come about. Revelation tells us what 7 times means. If you remember back in our discussion of chapter 12, there were a lot of numbers, a lot of time periods given, and we discussed the meaning of those in their context. But what Jehovah's Witnesses teach is that from that chapter we learn that we see times, time, and half a time. We said that was 3.5 times. 3.5 times was also equal to 1,260 days, according to chapter 12 of Revelation. And if we double that, 3.5 times will tell us what 7 times is equal to. It's equal to 2,520 days. So this period of suffering was to last 2,520 days. But you run into a problem. The oppression of God's people lasted longer than 2,520 days, says the Jehovah's Witness. Because of that, there must be another conversion to make. They pull that conversion, just continue the next page. They pull that conversion from the Old Testament. If you'll remember back to Numbers chapter 14, God's people are sent out into the wilderness to wander for how long? 40 years. Do you know why they had to wander for 40 years? Mm-hmm. Yes. There you go. So the spies went out to look at the land, and they were to come back and give a report for whether the Israelites were able to go into the land and what they were going to see when they did that. They brought back a bad report. At least a majority of them did. And so because of that, and because the Israelites followed that bad report and did not trust in God, they were told they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years because the spies wandered for 40 days. It is a direct conversion. 1 day is equal to 1 year, according to our Old Testaments. So as we move to the book of Revelation, 7 times must mean 2,520 years. Okay, I know there's a lot of numbers, so I hope you're following me. This period of 7 times that God's people would suffer would be 2,520 years. At the end of this 7 times, the church would come. God's kingdom would come. He would come to establish it. So putting this time period into its context, the time period where God's people began to suffer is in the year 607 BC, in the month of October. This is when God's people went into captivity at the hands of Babylon. And from that point on, God's people are suffering for 7 times. So if you do out the math, 2,520 years later gets you October of 1914. Very long path to get us here, but Revelation teaches us that the Church of God started in the year 1914. There's a few other things I want to talk about in regards to Jehovah's Witness. We'll go back to the time period in a second. At the end of this suffering, like we said, comes the church. There was something else we talked about in the book of Revelation. We've already talked about that the Jehovah's Witness teach. Does anybody remember what it was? There you go. There's a lot of things they do believe, but that's the one thing we've talked about thus far, is the 144,000. In chapter 7 of Revelation, you'll remember that there was 144,000 people who were going to heaven. And we talked about that, bringing about the idea of a complete group of God's people who would go to heaven. Well, Jehovah's Witness take it mostly literally. That 144,000 people are the ones who are going to get to enjoy heaven, literally. And that starts in 1914. So from 1914 till the end of time, 144,000 people, no more, no less, will go to heaven. Everyone else will stay on earth. Earth will be reborn, there'll be a new earth, and everyone else will have to stay here while the 144,000 get to enjoy heaven. Like I said, this is the foundation of the belief. There's obviously a lot of other details that we haven't talked about. But let's start to look at this and break this down a little bit. First, I want to look back at their keys. The keys that they gave to help us understand the book of Revelation. One of the first things we looked at was that things in this book are not to be understood literally. Okay? Next thing, we have to understand the rest of the Bible. And then they said that God's kingdom was established in 1914. I think it's clear to see that at least we know the third key is wrong. We talked about that already. The first 2 keys, it's clear to understand they've violated their own keys. From the very beginning of their doctrine, they have violated their own keys. Nothing is to be taken literally. We looked at a couple literal things. They're making literal calculations from the Bible and from the book of Revelation, understanding the rest of the Bible. It's clear that they don't understand the nature of the kingdom of God and the purpose of Jesus' coming 2,000 years ago. Let's look at it piece by piece. God's people awaited a worthy ruler. I would agree with that. The Old Testament does prophesy about a ruler who would come to fulfill the seed promise made to Abraham that would rule all other rulers. And their understanding of who this ruler is, I agree. It's Jesus. But it's their understanding of what type of ruler Jesus would be is where we differ. They believed that Jesus came to earth to establish an earthly kingdom. And not a spiritual one. It was established, and they say it was established in 1914. I'm going to continue most of our discussion on the assumption that we know the true nature of Jesus' kingdom. If we don't, that's a discussion for another time. I don't want to get into too much detail about that. I'm going to go with the assumption that we understand it was not an earthly kingdom, it was a spiritual kingdom. Jesus did not come to rule on earth. The kingdom of God was established when Jesus died on the cross and was raised out of the tomb. He did not prophesy about it coming later after he left. He came to establish the church, to establish the kingdom of God. I want to focus on the misuse of Revelation, since that's our discussion. Think about our 4 keys. Okay, we mentioned them again at the beginning of class. If we look at the 4 keys, how are the Jehovah's Witness and their teachings that we've looked at violating our 4 keys? Let's start with the first one, time frame. How are the Jehovah's Witness violating the time frame? I think it's...
You have the bookends in Revelation 1 and then chapter 22, things that must shortly take place. And so, they're violating it by pushing it forward some of the years.
Yeah. From the very beginning of the book of Revelation to the very end, John made it clear, these things are coming soon. These things are about to happen. The first key we looked at from the Jehovah's Witness said these things are about things that must take place long in the future. These things are about things that are in our time today in 2018. Clearly, they've broken the time frame that John establishes for the book. It cannot be outside of that time frame. The audience. If this message was about a church, about salvation being brought 1,914 years roughly later, what does that message mean to the saints in Asia Minor? Think about what John sets up. We've talked about this a little bit already, but John starts off in chapter 1, I know your tribulation, I know the difficulties you're going through, I know what's happening to you, but don't worry, help is coming, but none of you will experience it. It's way in the future. It doesn't fit. This message here, by making it something outside of the time frame and making it something outside the situation, doesn't make sense to those people. They wouldn't have known what it was about. The background. John is talking about these people. He's talking about their situation. He makes that very clear in chapter 1 and all through the book. We're talking about a very specific historical context in this book. So to rip it out of that context and make it be about the coming of the church thousands of years later, talking about those discussions and calculating long time periods and things like that, we're not talking about the saints of Asia Minor anymore. We're not talking about the difficulties that they're dealing with in the Roman Empire. This doctrine at this point is no longer discussing what the book of Revelation is discussing. They're misusing this book. They're taking aspects of this book to apply in ways they're not supposed to teach things that are not truth. And they contradict other things throughout the rest of the Bible. Again, understand this book has a specific style. It's not literal. It's figurative. You have to understand the symbolism. And like they said, you have to understand the rest of the Bible and how those things fit into it. the Jehovah's Witnesses have got a lot of things wrong in this doctrine, and we've obviously looked at some of those things. Numbers. If we take the numbers that they've looked at, it's a great example of things where they're taking some things that are literal, they're taking some things and making them figurative. It's inconsistent. It doesn't fit with the style that we talked about, understanding how this book is to be interpreted. I mean, if you look just at chapter 7 and their teachings on the 144,000, remember we said 144,000 Israelites represented a complete group of God's people. Well, they've taken half of that, 144,000, and made that something literal. Well, then they've taken the second half of that, the part about the Israelites, and they've dropped that off. And they've cut it off and made it, well, that can't be literal, because that can't apply to us. See, even within one statement, 144,000 Israelites, they're cutting it in half, approaching it in two very different ways. That's not how we can approach this book. That's not how we can approach any book. Stephen.
For studying the book of Revelation, we have to remember that direct literal teaching and all the rest of the New Testament cannot be violated and then superseded by some figure or symbolism there in the book of Revelation. And that's their mistake not only here, but also in many other doctrines.
Yeah.
They violate that rule of context. They pluck passages to prove some aspect of a point they're making, but there's total disregard for the rest of the literal information we have in the Bible.
Exactly. There's a lot of literal information through the Old Testament and the New Testament about the church, and about the true nature of the church, and about Jesus' purpose on earth. But if we apply this meaning to Revelation, all of that means nothing anymore. We've completely ignored it. We've completely gone against everything we've talked about before Revelation in the Bible. Ben, you have something to add?
I believe it was Charles Taze Russell that started this movement and the Watchtower Association or organization. I think it was maybe like in 1908 or somewhere around that time, which is just kind of interesting. I was just thinking about the timing of all this. If it began, a few years before all of this, okay, let's try to get all this put together. So here's a number of 1914. So it's kind of interesting looking back at that, just how all of this is now all of a sudden coinciding with one another.
They've taken the things written in the book and construed them in a way that fits their time frame, fits their background, their context. We can take anything out of the Bible and make it mean anything we want, if we want to. That's what these people have done. That's what these people believe. People believe this. These people aren't being deceptive just for the sake of being deceptive. Most of people who believe this truly believe it and teach this because they think it's truth. It's easy for us to understand. We've talked about Revelation for months now. It's easy for us to understand how these things don't fit and how these things don't make sense. Other people may not have it that easy. It may take longer. It may be more difficult to help them to see the truth on these matters because they believe it. They truly believe these things to be truth, truly believe that this is what the Bible teaches. We need to help those people. Those people have it wrong. And as a result, as the last chapter of Revelation says, those people who add to and take from this book will receive condemnation. Do not misuse this book. We need to help people see the truth. Have conversations with people about these things and help them to see what these things truly mean in their context. Do you have a comment?
With the starting in 607, like the suffering, starting in 607 by the calculations, and then having 2,500 years of suffering, and then in the first century it being written to the people coming many years later. It's just like just drop in the middle of the timeline. It's super a random time for the book to be written. If it was going to people in 1914 or whoever it was actually meant for by their interpretation. It's interesting that it was so long after the suffering started, I guess, if it's already 607.
Yeah, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit our keys. the things that John lays out, didn't even fit their own keys. They couldn't even come up with a way to properly explain it. It just doesn't fit. One last comment before we move on to the next section.
It wasn't really rampant for them at all if you want to be 144,000.
That's correct. Yeah, it's not completely random. It's self-serving. It was creating a doctrine where they could be saved, that would fit their needs, to fit their circumstances. And it's not right interpretation. We can't do things that way. For the sake of time, we're going to move on. Like I said, there's a lot of other things we could talk about regarding this doctrine. We've only touched on the surface, but we can have other conversations. Come talk to me later, and we can talk about other things if you want. We're going to move on to premillennialism. This is one I'm sure you've heard of. If you talk to people out in the world for long enough, you're going to hear about this. A lot of people believe premillennialism. A lot of people teach premillennialism, even if they don't know that it's called premillennialism. Most people teach this from the book of Revelation. This doctrine is focused on Jesus' second coming. It teaches that at some point in our future, Jesus will return to earth, and he will take his seat on the throne in Jerusalem. And all of the earth will be under his rule for 1,000 years. And it's not until the end of that 1,000 years that the world will end. The basis of this doctrine is found in Revelation chapter 20. You'll remember the discussion we had in chapter 20 about Satan being bound for 1,000 years. We talked about Christ reigning for 1,000 years. But we talked about that meaning that Satan was bound completely in this matter with Rome. Rome was completely removed from his arsenal of his weapons, and Jesus and the people of God were completely victorious in this situation with Rome. But this chapter brings about premillennialism for most of the world. I'll let you know now, I'm going to struggle on the word premillennialism so much. I can't say it very well. So like we said, this chapter teaches in premillennialism that there will be a literal 1,000-year reign of Jesus, and Satan will literally be bound for 1,000 years as well. And it's at the end of this 1,000 years that Satan will be unbound, the dead shall rise, the faithful will go to heaven with Jesus, and the unfaithful will remain on earth. There is some discrepancy in what they teach on that aspect. But this 1,000-year reign of Jesus is the foundation of this doctrine. And since that has not happened, since that 1,000-year, that millennial reign has not happened, we are currently pre-millennial. That's where the word comes from. We are currently before that 1,000-year reign of Jesus. One thing you'd probably be curious to know about, this doctrine teaches that it's interesting to note what this doctrine teaches about Jesus' first coming, 2,000 years ago when Jesus first came. That Jesus came to establish the kingdom. Jesus came to start the church. Jesus came to teach all of mankind the gospel, bring everyone to God, and establish the kingdom like God intended. But there was a problem. Nobody liked Jesus. That was the problem. Nobody liked Jesus, so they killed him. Jesus tried to start the kingdom, but couldn't do it because men killed him before he got that opportunity. So now, Jesus must come back at some point to do what he started, to finish what he started. Jesus failed. Let that soak in for a moment. Jesus failed. God's plan failed. Not everyone who believes premillennialism would admit to that being what their teaching says, but it is. They teach that Jesus came to establish the kingdom, it didn't pan out, and so he's coming later to finish the job. These people are teaching that Jesus failed. If Jesus tried but was killed before he could do it, that means he failed. There's no way around the fact that that's what this doctrine teaches. And we're going to talk about that more in a minute. But let's discuss more of the doctrine itself. I already talked about some of those things. So this doctrine teaches that at some point in the future, Jesus will return. He will return as king in Jerusalem for that 1,000-year reign. Satan will also be bound for that 1,000 years. And within there, the Battle of Armageddon will take place, where an antichrist will rise up and try to take the throne back from Jesus, will try to make one last-ditch effort to fight God and to win, and will lose. And it will continue with the 1,000-year reign. And at the end of the 1,000 years, the faithful go to heaven, the unfaithful will remain on earth under the oppression of Satan. There are two different categories of premillennialism. There is historical premillennialism and dispensational premillennialism. It's another hard one to say. These two categories are really two different approaches to this doctrine. I will tell you, don't start throwing these words out at people. Not many people who teach premillennialism know about these two categories. These really just tell about the origin of some of the teachings, and I'll explain that to you. If we look at historical premillennialism, historical is basically what we've talked about thus far. It began in about the 2nd century, so it wasn't long after Revelation was written. It was very popular, taught amongst a lot of different people, but around the last few hundred years of the first millennium, so around 700 to 1,000, it started dying off. People quit. They stopped teaching premillennialism because the Catholic Church became more powerful. The teachings of the Catholic Church came in, and that's what was enforced in most of the world. So premillennialism was very uncommon getting towards the end of the first millennium. And it continued that way for a while until many years into the future, America is discovered and colonized, and then we have the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, and premillennialism really started gaining some ground again. It really picked up some traction and started moving. People started teaching it again. It never went away during that time period. It just wasn't very common. And during the Protestant Reformation, dispensational premillennialism is really what became more common. Dispensational premillennialism is very similar, but adds a few elements to it. Dispensational teaches that the earth, from very beginning at creation to the very end of time, is divided into 7 dispensations. That's where dispensational comes into play. Those dispensations are, first, the dispensation of innocence. From the fall of Adam forward, we have that. Or up into the fall of Adam, sorry. From creation to the fall of Adam, we have the dispensation of innocence. Following that, from Adam to Noah, the dispensation of conscience. From Noah to Abraham, you have the dispensation of government. From Abraham to Moses, the patriarchal rule or promise. From Moses till Jesus, the time of the church, you have the dispensation of Mosaic law. And then the current age of the church, from the point that Jesus came and forward, you have the dispensation of grace, which is where we are right now. Following that will be dispensation number 7, which is the 1,000-year reign. So we are currently in dispensation number 6, the age of the church. We are before the 1,000-year reign. We are pre-millennial. Okay, remember, that's where that idea comes from. They believe that we are currently in the second to last dispensation. The book of Revelation, fitting it into its context here in this doctrine, is teaching about the coming of the 7th dispensation, which in this timeline is the end of things. The 7th dispensation will be the last, and that's what the book of Revelation is discussing within this doctrine. The seventh dispensation involves everything we talked about earlier. So we're talking about dispensational premillennialism. It talks about everything that historical premillennialism does, but then adds this in, that Jesus will come. It focuses on this, that Jesus will come and bind Satan for 1,000 years, and Jesus will reign for his 1,000 years. So here's where the main difference is between the two, historical and dispensational. It's the idea that historical premillennialism teaches that during that 1,000-year reign, all of God's people will be on earth with all of the unfaithful to go through whatever happens. The whole battle of Armageddon they'll have to face, the rise and the fall of Satan and all of those things, everyone will have to face. In dispensational, there's a difference. The transition from one to next is important. We have this idea of the rapture, I'm sure you've heard of. If somebody is teaching you about the rapture, they fall within the category of dispensational premillennialism. That's what they teach. If we look at the time frame, or the timeline of this all happening, so we're looking at a time frame of that transitional period, going from 6, where we are now, to 7. Dispensational teaches that after, in the 7th, is the 1,000-year reign. Prior to that, there will be 7 years of tribulation. What this means is that in this 7 years of tribulation, we will know the 1,000-year reign is about to come, because the earth will fall into utter chaos for 7 years. The earth will get to experience what it's like to be in utter chaos before Jesus finally comes and reigns for 1,000 years. At the beginning of this 7-year tribulation is the rapture. So I give you that to kind of put some of these things, some of these words you've probably heard, into context. The rapture is intended as God's way of preventing his people from going through all of this bad stuff. There's going to be 7 years of tribulation. There's going to be a 1,000-year reign where there's going to be great battles and blood and all that sort of stuff. Well, God's not going to let his people go through that. God wouldn't do that, so God has to have some way of preventing his people from going through that, and that's the rapture. So, let's talk about the rapture for a second. Like we said, it's at the beginning of the 7-year tribulation. Those who are, there's really two halves to the rapture. Those who are faithful to God, who are already dead, will be raised from the dead and will be called up to God in some manner. Immediately following that, all of the people left alive who are faithful to God will be taken up after that. So all of God's people, all of God's people will be taken up to God. Everything else and everyone else will be left behind, will remain here on earth to go through the 7 years of tribulation and everything else that will take place. Only God's people will be raptured up. It's really kind of unclear as to the nature of this rapture. Anyone who teaches this doctrine will tell you that they don't really know the nature of it. There's a lot of books and movies and TV shows about the rapture and about what will happen when we're raptured. People talk about what happens after the rapture. Nobody really knows exactly how it's going to happen, but it's really described by people as just, I'm here teaching Bible class, the rapture comes and poof, I'm gone. If you're left here, you missed it. You missed the rapture. I say that because there are a lot of people teaching, what do you do if you miss the rapture? What do you do if all of your friends and family around you are raptured and you're left on earth? There's a lot of books and teachings about that. We're not going to get into that because that's a long discussion. But it's interesting. People believe this. People are teaching these things. There are programs and teachings out there to help you prepare for the rapture, to help you know what to do if you miss the rapture. There are even programs that are set up to help you deal with your estate following your rapture. Here's one I found on the internet in researching these things. After the Rapture Pet Care. This is an actual website. You can go visit it. It has a nice video of pet owner or pets sitting behind watching their owners disappear and go up to God. If the rapture happened right now, what would happen to your pets? You can pay a service fee to have your pets be taken care of after you were raptured. Everybody's kind of laughing a little bit. We might think it's funny, but again, this is real. I didn't make this up. I actually found this in research on the rapture. People legitimately are sitting around waiting for God to take them up. They're preparing themselves for this. Ben, did you have something to add?
The Left Behind series, I read that in college. It was like 14 books. And, I think it was Tim LaHaye that wrote those. And so the influence is just so powerful. Where you have people evidently making money off of pet care.
Yeah. Yeah, people are making money off of this. And again, I don't think people are trying to be deceptive in these things. Again, people legitimately believe these things. They legitimately teach that these things are truth. But as we talk about these things, all of you are kind of laughing at the concept of it. Trust me, I was too. We understand that these things aren't truth. We understand that these things are not real. We don't read about these things in the book of Revelation or other places in our Bible. Obviously, there's a lot wrong with this doctrine. So let's discuss some of those things. Before we do you have a comment?
Maybe a trick question.
Uh-oh.
Where in Revelation does it talk about the rapture?
That's a great question. Let's see. It actually is not from the book of Revelation entirely. A little bit talks about the first and the second resurrection in chapter 19 or 20. Don't quote me on that. It's in there somewhere. That's where that idea comes from. It's also, I'll have to find the reference. I want to say 1 Thessalonians teaches about it teaches about the division at the end of time and God's people being separated from the enemies of God's people. Yeah, and it's taught from that, but for the sake of time, we're going to move on. We will discuss kind of the closing remarks on this next week as well. Did Jesus fail to establish his kingdom? Okay, no. Again, I'm going to go on the assumption that you know about the establishment of the kingdom and what Jesus taught on that. Jesus did not fail. God did not fail in his plan. Why would we want to follow a God and a Savior who couldn't stop man from preventing their plan? Before we discuss any other aspect of this doctrine, it falls apart on that alone. That this doctrine teaches that Jesus tried to do something and couldn't. God tried to put the plan of salvation into effect. Man overpowered God. It's the foundation of this teaching, which presents a huge problem that contradicts the teaching of who God is, of who Jesus is, of why Jesus came, of the nature of the kingdom. Jesus did not fail. This is a terrible misinterpretation of the Bible. So then to apply Revelation to that concept, immediately we know it's wrong. Now, next week we're going to get into this discussion more. We're going to talk a little bit about breaking down premillennialism some more. But that right there is a very gross misinterpretation that needs to be pointed out from the beginning. Comments?
One will be taken, one will be left. In that same gospel, what about Matthew 19, somewhere like that? And it also talks about the season. The season, you'll know the end of time. Now, why isn't that a parallel to this also?
Yeah. Is your comment short? You want to throw it in?
Jesus says, somebody do not face of death, you see the kingdom of God come with power. So there's either some pretty old people living.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that at the beginning of class next week. So thanks for listening.